Welcome to But Frankly Pierce News. I'm Arthur Fairview. Last week, Nancy Pelosi in the House of Representatives made it happen. They passed both infrastructure bills, as well as the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Bill. Sadly, however, at this time, that's where the good news ends.
Uh-oh.
I've got a bad feeling about this.
The bills now move to the Senate, where the Republicans plan to filibuster. This will essentially kill the bill unless 10 Republicans join with the Democratic caucus.
So what are the chances that could happen?
I'd say slim to none.
Never tell me the odds.
It seems unlikely, but that isn't the real tragedy. This is nothing new and nothing we didn't already know. The nuclear option for the right, aka the filibuster, has been the weapon of choice to slow, stymie, and effectively block legislation that they don't like.
Filibuster? It sure is a funny sounding word.
Filibuster.
So what is a filibuster anyway?
I'm glad you asked.
The term filibuster comes from the Dutch word Filibuster, meaning pirate or robber, which word is also the root of freebooter. It was used to refer to William Walker, who led a group of Americans to Nicaragua in 1855 to aid in a revolt to overthrow the government. For a time, he was successful and was able to take leadership of the nation. But his regime was ended when he was attacked by the surrounding nations.
So wait, filibuster refers to piracy or robbery and overthrowing a government?
Well, sort of, but it goes back even further than the 19th century.
In the time of the Romans, it was used most famously by Cato the Younger in his opposition to Julius Caesar. The rules in the Roman Senate were that all proceedings had to be ended before nightfall, so Cato simply talked until sunset, and the bill could not pass that day.
Thanks for the history lesson. But how does that relate to today?
Well, like this.
There are two types of filibusters in the U.S. Senate today. The most common one is called a silent filibuster. At the beginning of the nation, both the House and the Senate allowed the debate to be ended by a previous question motion, which could be passed by a simple majority. It seems as though that this was not normally used to stifle debate. In the Senate, this rule was dropped in 1806 when Aaron Burr, the Vice President of the United States, said it was redundant. This accidentally opened the door for senators to continue to talk as long as they could to delay a bill from passing. In 1917, Senate Rule 22 was added, allowing debates to be limited when a closure motion is passed with a 3/5 majority. This means that as long as 40% of the senators do not want a bill to come to the floor, they can block it by continuing to speak and refusing to vote for a closure motion. Today it's called a silent filibuster because the senators do not even have to go to the floor to speak. Because if 40% of them threaten a filibuster, the Senate moves on to other business, knowing that they'll never be able to finish the debate.
This requires important votes. To need 3/5 of the senators to desire the vote to take place. This also means the legislation itself needs a 3/5 majority to pass instead of a simple majority because they can't close the debate.
That sounds familiar.
Use of this type of filibuster has grown in recent years. In fact, it has been viewed by some as pure laziness. Instead of having to actually stand up and speak, holding the floor and refusing to yield.
If 40% of the senators will not join in refusing to close debate, one member can continue speaking as long as he can, refusing to yield the floor to allow the bill to proceed. But the rules don't make it easy for them. They can't take any breaks from speaking and can't even sit down. They can take questions without yielding the floor, allowing their fellow senators to give them a break with very long-winded questions. The senator conducting the filibuster is still not allowed to leave the room.
In any case, with so many bills coming out of the House and headed to the Senate, their fate might already be sealed.
Foregone conclusion.
Destined to fail.
Unless the filibuster can be reformed. Daniel Bryan, the executive director of POGO, the Project on Government Oversight, has made a strong case that the filibuster must be reformed. The filibuster no longer fosters the consensus necessary to enact critical reforms to address the challenges of the day, and instead often stands in the way of compromise. It has become a method for the minority to easily block legislation rather than force the dissenting lawmakers to work with the majority on a path forward. A rule that ensures almost nothing ever gets done is not worth preserving in its current form.
I see your point.
Ms. Bryan suggests inverting the filibuster. This would place the burden on the dissenting minority to actively come up with the votes to block it. Under this procedure, 41 votes would be required to continue debating or filibustering and preventing advancement of the bill.
That goes without saying.
To encourage debate and active participation, bill supporters should have to get 3/5 of senators present and voting to pass a bill rather than 3/5 of the entire Senate. For example, if there are only 95 senators present, cloture could be invoked with 57 votes.
Oh, maybe it's better this way.
Lastly, eliminating the filibuster on motions to proceed while leaving it in place for the actual bill vote. Under current Senate rules, unless there is a unanimous consent of all senators to begin debate on a bill, the majority leader must make a motion that the Senate proceed to its consideration. This motion to proceed is debatable and subject to a vote and is often what is actually filibustered rather than the underlying bill. It is likely that most of the public is not aware that all too frequently, their elected representatives in the Senate aren't even debating the critical issues of the day on the Senate floor because of the filibuster.
Amazing. It's absolutely amazing.
Under this proposal, a motion to proceed would still be debatable, but it would only take a simple majority vote to pass and for the Senate to take up the bill. Final passage would still be subject to a 60-vote threshold. While the minority could still block final passage, the Senate could at least have a rigorous public debate and make the case to the public for why the bill should or shouldn't pass.
Yeah, they're not going to go for that.
Ms. Bryan concluded, what these reforms would do, either on their own or with one or more reforms enacted in conjunction with one another, is facilitate rigorous debate about significant legislation, setting the stage for bipartisan compromise where possible.
It could work!
In other news, the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol has stepped up their game in a big way. The committee, headed by Representative Benny G. Thompson, has asked 8 federal agencies for records. Thompson sent letters to the National Archives and Records Administration, NARA, which keeps the records for the government, the Defense Department, the Department of Homeland Security, the Interior Department, the Department of Justice, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the National Counterterrorism Center, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence.
Wait, you said 8 agencies.
Yeah, that was only 7.
While the House had previously asked the National Archives for all records it had covering the events and federal actors involved in the events of January 6th itself, the Select Committee is using a much wider lens. It has asked the departments not just for the records covering January 6th, but also for those reaching back as far as April 1st, 2020, to see if the Trump administration had plans to contest and ultimately, should he lose, overturn the election.
White House records too?
That would make 8.
Yes. The committee has asked the departments for any records about plans to derail the electoral count, organize violent rallies, declare martial law, or use the government positions to overturn the election results. It has also asked for any documents and communications about foreign influence in the 2020 election through social media and misinformation.
That's a big can.
And then there was this little golden nugget of information. The last items the committee asked NARA to produce were all documents and communications related to the January 3rd, 2021 letter from 10 former defense secretaries warning of the use of military in election disputes.
Now, why do you suppose they would ask for that?
I can't possibly imagine.
We now go to our secret, but frankly fierce investigative reporter, Bob.
Bob?
His name is Bob. We couldn't do any better than Bob?
It's not his real name. He's undercover.
Hey,
Sorry. We now go to Bob, undercover.
that letter, which was published in the Washington Post and signed by all 10 of the living former defense secretaries, warned that efforts to involve the U.S. Armed Forces in resolving election disputes would take us into dangerous, unlawful, and unconstitutional territory. It seems someone was seriously considering use of military force against the civilian population to resolve issues around the election if it didn't go someone's way. The letter continues, Civilian and military officials who direct or carry out such measures would be accountable, including potentially facing criminal penalties for the grave consequences of their actions on our republic. The letter reminded then Acting Defense Secretary Christopher C. Miller and his subordinates that they were each bound by oath, law, and precedent to facilitate the entry into office of the incoming administration and to do so wholeheartedly. They must also refrain from any political actions that undermine the results of the election or hinder the success of the new team. This was an extraordinary letter, and its authors thought it was important enough to write it over the holidays for publication 3 days before the January 6th electoral count. The driving force behind the letter was former Vice President Dick Cheney.
And let's not forget that Cheney's daughter, Liz Cheney, sits on the House Select Committee.
The biggest tell in all of this is that Trump has threatened to invoke executive privilege to stop the release of the documents. I gotta go.
Okay. Thanks, Bob. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy said the committee's action proved it is not looking for truth, but rather is engaging in politics. The committee asked NARA for records of communications between the president and any member of Congress or congressional staff. This will sweep in McCarthy, who had a heated conversation with Trump on the phone as rioters invaded the Capitol. They come for members of Congress. They are coming for everybody, he said.
There's something wrong with us, something very, very wrong with us.
Such a sweep is precisely how scholars actually figure out what has happened in historical events. Limiting research before you know the lay of the land simply obscures the larger picture.
That's the fact, Jack! That's the fact, Jack!
And finally, the Select Committee has asked major telecom companies to save phone records of certain individuals. Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Jim Jordan, Andy Biggs, Paul Gosar, Mo Brooks, Madison Cawthorn, Matt Gaetz, Louis Gohmert, Jody Heiss, Scott Perry, failed former President Donald Trump, Ivanka Trump, Donald Jr. and Eric Trump, daughter-in-law Lara Trump, as well as Kimberly Guilfoyle, who is Trump Jr.'s girlfriend and worked on the campaign.
So the usual suspects.
This has been But Frankly Pierce News. Thanks for watching. I'm Arthur Fairview. You know we've told you before, but you didn't hear us then. So you still question why? No, you didn't listen again.